Good evening. I'm Megan Finnerty, and I am so excited that you're here to join us. I'm here on behalf of the Storytellers Project and the USA Today Network to welcome you to this very special live edition of the Storytellers Project as we partner with Humana and several amazing chefs and one everyday woman who has a special story to benefit the work of Feeding America. We appreciate you tuning in tonight and taking a chance on live storytelling and sharing your evening with us. It means so much to have you here creating community with us. Since 2016, the Storytellers Project has brought more than 100 shows each year to communities across America. But right now, we've postponed, well, like most of our season for the obvious reasons, because we're following the CDC guidelines and we want to stay safe just like you do. And it feels right now, all of us are looking for ways to connect more than ever. And so we're bringing you this special show, and we hope it brings you entertainment, comfort, and inspiration. And we also hope it brings you a chance to be there for your neighbors. As part of the USA Today Network's response to the coronavirus, we have handpicked 5 amazing chefs, and like I said, one real person to tell stories tonight live from their homes. They're going to be true first-person stories that we promise are relatable, touching, and we know more than anything, entertaining. So here's what tonight is not. Tonight is not a TED Talk. It's not Toastmasters. It's not a how-to. It's not an inspirational speech or a lecture or a slideshow. And we're not going to sell you anything. We're just going to ask you to donate some money. And before we get into the show, I want to bring up our storytellers so you can say hi to them. Are you ready? We are so excited to have with us Rocco DiSpirito. Rocco, thank you for being here. Maneet Chauhan. Thank you. Hi, Maneet. Claudette Zepeda.
Hi.
Edward Lee. Hi, Edward.
Hello, how are you?
Erin Mare. And later this evening, we're also going to hear from Rosemary Pellet. She's a volunteer with Feeding America who's going to help bring it home for us. Here's what tonight is about with those amazing storytellers. We're here to visit with you. You know how to visit. You open your heart, you listen, and you engage with a person who you want to feel closer to. And we hope you want to feel close to our storytellers. We invite you to do that with us tonight. Some of these stories are going to be really polished and professional. Some are going to be casual and conversational. We ask you to receive all of them in the spirit in which they're intended, because that's how community connection really happens. It even happens over the internet. Tonight's theme is about connections over food, memorable meals and moments. And we bring that to you tonight because we are here to donate money and raise money for Feeding America, because their mission is more important than ever right now. You'll hear about that throughout tonight's show. More than anything, though, tonight's show is about our most deeply held values: hope, perseverance, compassion, love, generosity. We're here to create empathy and understanding because we know it is vital in times of uncertainty more than ever. So please join us in welcoming our very first storyteller, Erin Mare. Hi, Erin. Okay, take it away.
Thanks, Megan. First, I'd like to just thank you for having me here, but I want to dispel any notion this will be one of those polished and professional stories that you alluded to moments ago. So I'll go with casual and conversational, I think. I love so much about food and community. It's been a long part, a big part of my life for so long, ever since I was a little kid, and cooking with my grandmother and cooking with my family and having food around and passing and sharing and telling stories and talking about your day and all that great stuff that goes around the dinner table and is often shared with food. And I have obviously chosen to make it my life's work, right? So dealing with food and cooking and feeding people, and the conversations about food continue up until this very moment, which is why I'm here today. So I was lucky enough growing up in the suburbs of Chicago to attend like a sleepaway camp. I know some of you maybe have these different ideas of what a sleepaway camp is. But I grew up in the North Shore of Chicago. I went to sleepaway camp up in the picturesque North Woods of Wisconsin. If you imagine like the idyllic, 200-acre plot of land on a chain of lakes in the middle of the woods, replete with baseball diamonds and basketball courts and tennis courts and water ski boats and all of that kind of stuff. And I started going there when I was 7 years old, 8 years old. And I went there until I was old enough to be a counselor there eventually for 1 or 2 years, and stopped going when I was about 17 or 18. And along the way, you grow up with all sorts of food experiences at camp. It's your first time away from your family. It's your first time away from maybe your mother or father who feeds you or chooses what to feed you. And you get to start making life choices. Like, is it a good idea to have 3 cheeseburgers at lunch before playing a full game of softball? Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. You're going to find out because you're on your own now, right? Is it a good idea to eat peanut butter and jelly sandwiches every night for dinner, 30 nights in a row? Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. You're going to find out, though, now that you're away at camp. And this camp, place called Camp Menominee in Eagle River, Wisconsin, great place. I love it very much still to this day. And it was probably not unlike a lot of other camps. I mean, we didn't have Bill Murray as our director, like in Meatballs, but we had our stories about, the meat man who lived down at the end of the road, who, stalked misbehaving campers. And we had the camp chef, who, not unlike a school lunch lady or a cafeteria lunch lady, was often revered, but more often feared. She could be seen with her blue station wagon, smoking cigarettes out back, drinking coffee, chastising the youth running around her for being youthful and exuberant. And she would feed us things that we probably didn't see back home in the suburbs of Chicago growing up as we did. We had stuff like cream chip beef and chicken Kiev replete with squirting butter, beef stroganoff, tuna noodle casserole, lots of, sort of, for lack of a better term, like junior league women's recipes from days gone by. And we ate it, and some of it was okay, and most of it was really mediocre at best. And we would have traditions, though, like the chicken Kiev, like the cling peaches with cottage cheese, the grilled cheese with tomato soup, all the things that you would expect. And life was great, and it was beautiful. And, we had great traditions with the Lazy Susan and, refilling things and spilling maybe pitchers of water that were unevenly bottomed on purpose off the Lazy Susan onto your bunkmates or nemesis, as it were. And there were all sorts of great times centered around food. And in the mess hall where announcements would get made, and there was this big, sort of to-do made about everything. It's kind of centered around that mess hall life, around lunch, around dinner. Teams were picked, awards were awarded, achievements memorialized, etc. And that was a great part of my life. And when I was 17 or 18, that ended, and I went to college and eventually left college to go to culinary school, and left culinary school to ply my trade as a cook and eventually a chef. But as I was growing up and going to camp, for many years, 3 or 4 years in a row, my counselor as a young child at camp was a guy who grew up on the same street as me in Wilmette, Illinois, a gentleman named Steve, who's awesome, who's still in my life very much. And Steve was my counselor. Steve ended up buying the camp and running it as the director and owner of the camp. And as I made my way through life at culinary school and becoming a cook, it was time for Doris, the former cook, in her blue station wagon, smoking cigarettes in her house dress, making delicious cream chip beef and chicken Kievs for the youth at camp. Doris's time had expired. I don't know if it had expired on this earth yet, but it had definitely expired at Camp Menominee. And I got the call that I never expected to get, asking if I wanted to come back to camp as the camp chef. And like any aspiring chef who was dreaming of greatness and James Beard Awards and TV fame and all sorts of other things that stupid young cooks in their 20s think about, I'd never dreamed that I would go cook grilled cheese sandwiches and tomato soup for overprivileged youth from the suburbs of Chicago, summering in the North Woods. But the more that I thought about it, and as it really dawned on me that this was a realistic possibility, I had to take Steve up on this opportunity and become the camp chef. But I decided I wasn't going to be the camp chef the way Doris was, or the way many camp chefs are. I was going to be a part of the community at camp, right? I mean, I'm feeding maybe 250, 300 people a day, 3 meals a day. So you're doing 1,000 meals a day, mostly with untrained kitchen help. And that takes a lot of time, but I didn't want to just do box food, canned food, food from the freezer. I didn't want to do the same old. I wanted to do something great, because I was that kid one day. And, who knows where those kids are going to be one day in the future. So I did everything that I could to make it great. And I also did everything I could to participate in the lives of everybody else at camp the same way a counselor would, or an assistant director would, or anybody else there would, but it had never been done before by the cooks, right? So I'd be out there pitching softball to the little 8-year-olds. I'd be out there pulling water skiers in the boats. I'd be out there playing basketball with the counselors in the counselor games. And I would like just immerse myself in this life that I had known before. Now that I'm, a little bit older, I'm still by no means the oldest person there. And by no means an outsider. These are my people. I'm used to this. I was there for a decade or more before this, right? So I started to change the conversation about food, and we started to do things, growing up at camp, there was always a barbecue pit in the middle of this gully where we would play capture the flag and all these other games. I always wondered why the barbecue pit was in the middle of this gully. So we just moved it. We moved it behind the kitchen, and it made so much more sense, and it made capture the flag games better, and it made everything better, and slowly improvements like that, and improvements to, grilling hamburgers instead of cooking them in the oven the way they were baked before, and making some delicious changes to scratch-made food, scratch-baked goods. All of that was really great and really meaningful, and I think really appreciated by the campers, the staff, the parents of the campers. We became a little bit renowned for having a little more talented kitchen and a little more care and thought for food, which obviously when you're sending your children away is an important thing that, maybe as a kid you don't think about it, but as a parent you're like, I wonder what my kids are going to eat. I wonder if they're going to be fed nutritious food. I wonder who's looking out for them to make sure they don't eat peanut butter and jelly sandwiches 40 days in a row, or to make sure they don't have 3 cheeseburgers before playing softball every day for lunch, et cetera, et cetera. But one of the most meaningful community changes, there's an alumni group that goes up to camp every year, I think to this day still, I know till this day still. And, one of the big thrills on visiting day was to go to this old, well-established, what they call in Wisconsin, supper clubs, right? You don't go to, a restaurant is like a McDonald's or a Subway. A supper club is the kind of place where you would, go with your parents for dinner. And there's this venerable old supper club called the White Stag. And the White Stag cooked everything over live wood in a fireplace, basically in the middle of the restaurant. And they had the salad where everything, the dressings were all homemade and blendable. And we used to make a joke about all this stuff. And but we look forward to going there on visiting day. And the alumni group goes there every year. And every year we'd go there, and a lot of us would order a hamburger because they had no cheese there. So you could never get a cheeseburger. So for years and years, we ate hamburgers at the White Stag. And now that I had the keys to the kitchen, and we were right down the road from the White Stag, for the closing banquet of the alumni weekend, a really good friend who attended camp with me, who's a great guy, tremendous sense of humor, tremendous joker, Mark Cahan. Mark came to me before we all left for this dinner, and Mark said, Aaron, I need some sliced American cheese wrapped in cellophane. And I said, for what? And he said, I need some American cheese wrapped in cellophane. And I said, of course, man, whatever I can do for you. Now that I'm the big shot chef here, it'd be my pleasure. So I obliged Mark with a slice of American cheese and wrapped in cling wrap, and he put it right in his pocket, just like a little kid might put gummy bears or Juji fruits or something. And I watched him crumble the American cheese into this plastic into his pocket. I took one for myself, I think one for another friend. And we went to the White Stag that night, and we ordered our hamburgers. And in an act of youthful rebellion, in an act of community, in an act of appreciation for the nostalgia of the food, we took those now kind of warm pocket slices of cheese, and we made cheeseburgers, and we triumphed over the sort of regime of boring, bland hamburger to make this cheeseburger, and it became legend. So 20 years later, 10 years later, however many years later it's now been, the alumni of Menominee and the youth of Menominee still smuggle, I hope I'm not ruining this by telling the story to everybody, but they still smuggle cheese into the White Stag to make cheeseburgers. And much can be said about cheese and the kind of cheese and the quality of cheese. We're at camp. American cheese is legendary. Legendary. The dairy state of Wisconsin, home of American cheese. Everybody likes cheese. I mean, there's books, Who Moved My Cheese? There's cheese and cocktail parties. There's wine and cheese pairings. There's so much great things. But to me, it will always come down to those warm slices of American cheese in cling wrap in our pockets that we used to sort of fight the man and rage against the machine in a way that is often talked about, often brought up, often reminisced about, and honestly, a really important part of that food community and those memories. You know, we talk about camp, we talk about food, we talk about the memories and camaraderie and fraternal growth and everything else that you think you would talk about after spending 8 weeks of your summer living with all these people every year, year in and year out. But the American cheese and the cling wrap smuggled into the restaurant, the brainchild of Mark Cahan, it lives on forever, and I'll always remember it. And I think that Mark and hopefully myself are regarded with the proper amount of respect that food and community has embraced that story. And that's it. So if you find yourself in the Northwoods, Wisconsin, definitely go to the White Stag and definitely eat the burger, but bring your cheese with you. Bring your own cheese, I guess, is the lesson.
Oh my God. Erin, thank you so much for your story and for inspiring, I think, like a lot of renegade people to like bring their own cheese with them places. Is that what you're saying?
I think it's, yeah, bring your own cheese.
Listen, it's a new thing. Erin, I want to thank you for, first of all, donating your time, telling your story, but also reminding us that like it doesn't really matter if it's cling wrap cheese, right? It matters about the memories, the moments, and the people.
Exactly. Food is memories. And a lot of times, more importantly than the quality of the food is the quality of the memories and the quality of the company. And, you know, unlike a lot of people, which is why Feeding America needs your money, so feel free to donate right now. The fact that you have food is reason enough to be happy and to celebrate and to enjoy whatever it is you have and laugh and tell stories and share memories and build on that.
Thank you so much for being with us tonight, Erin. I appreciate it. Awesome. We are especially thankful to Erin. That is the, I think, 5th time he has told with the Storytellers Project. He's a big supporter. The project started in Phoenix, Arizona in 2011, where Erin used to be a chef in many of our restaurants. So we appreciate his support of the project for a long time now. You know who else supports this project, though? Humana, because Humana is our national presenting sponsor for the Storytellers Project in our normal times when we're in the real world, telling stories in 22 cities, more than 100 nights a year. And we're so thankful that Humana believes in the connection of storytelling so much that they are on board with our virtual season right now, because they understand that sharing stories makes for healthier people and healthier communities. And we know that we need these connections to each other and to our health now more than ever. So as the COVID-19 situation kind of continues to change and evolve, Humana is still committed to the health, safety, and well-being of the people and communities it serves, including all of us. And if you want to learn more about what they're doing or any of their tips or how to stay safe, please visit humana.com, because they want to be here to connect you to better health personally and in your community. But especially tonight for Feeding America, they are passionate about fighting food insecurity, because they know that good, healthy food is vital to your personal health and that of your community. So we're super thankful to Humana for always sponsoring the Storytellers Project, but for specifically bringing us the time and resources to help Feeding America right now. I am excited to welcome up Claudette Zepeda. She is our second storyteller, and she is joining us from San Diego. Claudette,
Hi.
Please take it away. Hi.
Hi, how are you? Thank you for having me. Well, I wanted to give a little story about the journey of my life and the journey of kitchens in this industry, being a mother and being a daughter of immigrants. The people closest to me will say that I am, 2 words define me: mother and gypsy. Home has always been where my soul feels calmest. Sometimes it's a place. And the majority of the time, home is Mexico. I grew up in Tijuana, Baja California, Mexico, on the border of San Diego and Mexico, and was raised by 2 immigrant parents, Nancy and Hugo. And my brother Miguel and I were the sandwich kids. We were the meat and cheese of the sandwich. And I remember running amok alongside 3 of my brothers. I have 5 brothers altogether. Never letting them leave me behind. I vividly remember watching the movie Goonies and laughing, because that's how I remember our life in Tijuana, just with a lot more chiles and tortillas. One of the biggest questions, or most often asked questions I get in my entire career life is, how did I come to cooking as having it be my career? I can honestly say, like, this far into my career, that I feel like it chose me. Growing up the way I did with my brothers, always kind of in and out of kitchens, in and out of spaces, in and out of homes that probably weren't ours. I always gravitated towards the kitchen. The second I could reach a table, I was in between my mother and my grandmother's legs as they cooked. My father immigrated into the States in the 60s, in 1967, I believe, into Los Angeles. And, he worked in the restaurant industry. He parked cars, and he developed a palate for cuisine that obviously he wasn't used to in Mexico. But my mom in the 80s, he brought along his palate to Tijuana, and my mother was blindsided. I remember vividly watching her make a mess of the kitchen, and cookbooks and magazines, and the TV was on with cooking shows on public broadcast TV. And these are burned into my earliest memories. And I thought it was so courageous. Now when I think about it, it's so courageous. For one, my mother learning English through TV. And then secondly, teaching herself how to cook my dad's cravings du jour, which sometimes were oddball things like escargot or drawn butter with steamed artichokes. Like, who eats like that in Tijuana? It was just different for us. But I thank him for the palate that I have now. And my brothers and I remember learning how to speak English, watching KPBS. My favorite dinner guests were Julia Childs and Jacques Pepin. Could hear the accents. I'm surprised we don't have crazier accents from watching those different TV shows that we watched. And the one always constant was the smells coming out of the kitchen in the house in Tijuana, and the house my entire life. And if we weren't in Tijuana, we were in Guadalajara. And in Guadalajara, it was being from sun up to sundown at my Aunt Lorenza's restaurant. I was always surrounded by women, cooks, diners at the restaurant. And the food, the people, and the energy is what was literally, I feel like it was seared into me. That energy that is not, you can't replicate it easily. The buzz of a restaurant was seared into me. I finally, after so many years of child labor, started working at my very first paid restaurant gig. I'm 15 years old at a Chicago deep dish place. And I knew right then from the first week that I had begun a lifelong journey in this hospitality industry. And I love the restaurant. I love the home that it gave me. I love the family unit it provided. Most of people don't get to pick their family, but the restaurant industry is unique that you really do develop a family bond with who you work with. And there's a very specific type of person that can make it in this industry. It's a hard life. We leave limping at the end of the night after a crazy night, and we show up every single day to do it again. And I believe Einstein would call that the definition of insanity. But it's what we live for. I can't see myself ever doing anything else. And the role of cook and chef took me years to get to, but I feel like one of the most brilliant things of what we do is that we never stop learning. And through the insane lows and the crazy highs and being passed up on jobs because I was a mom or because I was in pastry and I couldn't handle savory. And little did I know that I was really developing these aces in my back pocket one day that would serve me and that would push me and push my family forward. In 2016 was this crux moment for me. And after the job, I was presented to the opportunity to go live in Mexico City while competing on Top Chef Mexico for the second season. I was terrified. Thought, no way, even though I am ESL, I spoke Spanish as my native tongue and I spoke Spanish first. I thought, I was curious to go and see how I would kind of measure up with my peers in Mexico, but I was terrified. And I also know one thing about myself is if it doesn't terrify me, it doesn't interest me. I kind of like doing things that scare me. So I packed my stuff up and left, prepared to leave my family for 3 months, as I called it, my chef deployment. And I remember the second I landed there, those 15 other contestants became my family. And when I went there, I went thinking I was going to go, learn about my roots and, receive a baptism by fire, basically. But what I ended up leaving there was really my first passion project became very focused on that journey. And my first passion project was on Mexican cuisine. And it evolved from the beginning of the taping till the end when I left Mexico City. It evolved into highlighting all the 7 regions of Mexico, the states in them, and most importantly, the matriarchs that keep the recipes in every region alive and share them with the world. And these women travel to France, to Germany, Morocco to share the ingredients in the food of Mexico. For me, meeting one of these women in particular really kind of shook me to my core. I got to meet and learn from, in the 2 years that I researched several times, I got to meet and cook with Juana Bravo. She's an indigenous Purépecha matriarch, and in 2010, Juana Bravo was named by UNESCO a traditional cook, cocinera tradicional, and tasked with preserving the recipes, or as UNESCO titles it, preserving the cultural heritage of humanity. That's, I think, one of the heaviest titles to kind of carry with you. And I'm so proud of her. I'm so proud of all the other matriarchs that do the same thing for their states. And Juana represents the state of Michoacan. Very close to when I had met her, I remember being at an event in Mexico, and Juana and her daughter Luz were making corundas, and they're pyramid-shaped tamal, always made with fresh corn leaves from the actual stalk of the plant, sometimes filled with cheese, sometimes just masa. They don't eat very much meat. The indigenous culture in Michoacan don't eat a lot of meat. And I remember kind of being drawn to her and being hypnotized as she folded the masa into these fresh corn leaves to make the iconic shape. And she was folding it similar to how you would fold a flag to put it away. So in order to get those 3, the sides and everything perfect. And I saw her murmuring words. And I remember my grandmother always saying when she cooked. So I thought, maybe she's singing. And turns out she was praying over the food as she prepared it. And this was a big shift for me because I thought of my grandmother, and I thought, well, maybe my grandmother, when she sang, I lost my grandmother in 2012, and I thought, well, maybe when my grandmother sang, she was giving us that happiness, that intention, that positivity, and that love that we could taste in her food. And that's why her food tasted like no one else's. And she had that magic touch. And I remember watching Juana, and it reminded me of the book. One of my favorite books is Like Water for. And all of these feelings of wanting to speak these women's names and speak these women's traditions and cook these women's food, because if they don't have a voice and if they are not being heard or seen, or their food's not being eaten, their traditions will eventually die with them. And so by the time I finished my research and the restaurant developed in my head and my heart, some nights I would sit in the construction site and just visualize what it would feel like full of people and that buzz, and visualize that feeling, that electric feeling that I would get since I was a child being in my aunt's restaurant when it was completely packed. One thing was, I knew for sure I wanted the menu to honor these women, and I wanted to honor the women who raised their families with love and put all of their just solid, beautiful intentions in their food that made do with nothing. That was something that I felt like it was my calling as a daughter of an immigrant, as a daughter of a warrior and the granddaughter of a warrior, niece, and all these women. Just, it felt like that was what I needed to do in this journey of building a restaurant. And what these women created and how they fed their families in the face of adversity, it was just never lost on me. I was in complete awe. And, you sat down in the restaurant and you were going to see their names on the menu, and you were going to enjoy the mole poblano from Francisca, from the state of Puebla, inside the duck tamal. And, you were going to thank your lucky stars that you got to taste Juana's corundas topped with caviar and cream, because after all, I'm a chef, so I have to chef it up a little. And then even enjoy my mom Nancy's albondigas. And some nights you might see her behind the line cooking with me. And that was something that was just, if I could do that for them. As a chef, I wanted to run my restaurant with the same love that my mother ran our house and my grandmother ran her house, and with the strength of these women. And I don't know anyone that wants to disappoint their mother. So this project was going to be a solid homage to women and mothers. And now almost 20 years later in this career, not only has been a mother and knowing pastry and savory has helped me, but it defines me as the chef that I am today. And, stepping into my power as a woman because of these women, because of being in their presence and just absorbing that matriarchal aura, really, it's, as hippie as it sounds, it's contagious. And it made me the most creative I could be and the most driven that I had ever been, because of the women that raised me, because of the women that shared their stories with me and that fed me. And, I'll never be able to repay them, but I do know that for the rest of my career, I will honor them and I will speak their names as long as I can, tie my apron and share their stories with anyone that will listen. And, my kids will, and the generation of cooks that I mentor will know that the names that they need to speak of their ancestors and teachers will always be something that they need to do in order to keep those traditions alive. And in order to keep that, remember that where you come from. And I think that is something that Juana taught me with a simple act of making a corunda, of, do everything with intention. And, if you don't love it, don't do it. And positive vibes when you're cooking, obviously you can taste. I think that I am pretty much, I can attest to that. I can attest to when you say you eat your feelings. I remember very vividly what corundas tasted like when Juana made them. And that was something that I always to achieve with my food. And, I think that's a legacy that I'm content with leaving when it's my time to go. And I think that it's one that my children would be very proud to carry on. And I hope that every single person gets to ask their grandmother, what did they eat when they were little? And what are the traditions that they had when they were young? Because traditions aren't static. And it changed my life. Meeting these women changed my life. So I think that crosses ethnicities, and generations. I think that we should all learn from our mamas. And why, dear mama.
Thank you so much, Claudette. How do you feel? That was so powerful.
Thank you. I felt great. I almost got choked up talking about my grandma, but
I know, I heard it. Thank you so much for reminding us, like, our food comes from somewhere. Our food comes from real people who pour their whole hearts into it. I know you do, and the women before you did, and obviously your dad. I mean, thank you so much. I felt like we met your whole family.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for joining us.
And this is Juana too. Here, she's actually in my dining room, if you can see her.
That's art
her.
of her. Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Claudette, thank you for joining our show tonight on behalf of Feeding America and USA Today. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
We're going to hear from our friend Marcus Samuelson, who's recorded a powerful message for you. We hope that it touches your heart, and we appreciate his participation tonight.
Hey everybody, I hope you're really enjoying watching the show. But please don't forget to hit that donate button right now. And thank you so much for supporting Feeding America.
Oh my gosh. Thanks, Marcus. We appreciate you recording those for us. We are super excited to welcome up our next chef, Rocco DiSpirito, who has been literally talking about food, making food, and sharing his love of food with so many people for like 20 years now, Rocco. You've been in America's living rooms while you're in your own kitchens.
Has it been that long?
I think so.
Thank you, Megan.
I Googled you, Rocco.
You.
Anyway, Rocco, I'm going to let you take the stage. Thank you so much.
I appreciate it. Thank you so much, Megan. Thank you, Claudette and Erin, for your beautiful stories. And thank you, Chef Marcus, for supporting Feeding America, an organization I've been involved with for many, many years. I've seen in the field, testifying at subcommittees in Congress and at fundraisers, and I can attest that they do tremendous work on every level. So if you're feeling like being absurdly generous tonight, this is a good place to lend your generosity to. This is a story about a person who's absurdly generous, and it's called Giving Nicolina. It's about my mother, who to me, of course, was a saint. But she wasn't always a saint. She lied a lot. My mom was a liar. She lied about 3 things consistently her whole life. She lied about her age, her name, and her means. When you asked her her age, she would always joke She was 21 plus, and somehow that worked for her. I'm not sure how, but it did. She had me when she was 41 years old, so there is no way she was ever close to 21 plus during my lifetime. But it was a charming little joke that she made that worked really well. She always liked to be funny whenever she had an opportunity to. She also lied about her name. If you asked her what her name was, she'd never say, "My name is Nicolina." I'm not sure it was because she got impatient and tired of spelling it for people or explaining it to people. But she said, "Just call me Mama." She said this to everyone, thousands of people that she met in her life. "Just call me Mama." She valued being a mom above anything. To her, being a mom was the highest level a person could achieve. The kind of caring and generosity and giving without gain that comes with being a mom, for her, was second nature. And she also lied about her means. She never really had the means to be absurdly generous, but she gave as if she had plenty. She always had food on her, my mother. And it was always at the bottom of her purse, her raggedy purse, and I'm talking about the 1970s, New York City. People didn't have designer purses, not people like my mom or anyone in my family. We had, sometimes they were just plastic bags, but she always had food. And oddly enough, it was Italian food. Odd for me because I was dying for them to acculturate, to learn the language, to speak English at home. We'd have fights about this, to stop being so Italian. I was so ashamed. I had so much ethnic self-loathing as a child. I couldn't deal with my mom being herself, being the first generation Italian immigrant that she was. So in New York City in the 70s, the way you got around wasn't with Uber. We didn't dare take taxis because that was way too expensive. There weren't really car services. We all took the subway or buses, the MTA, as we like to call it, the Metropolitan Transit Authority. These were the people who were responsible for getting us to school, to our grandma's house, to our friend's house, to anywhere we needed to go. If we needed to go shopping, it was a couple of subway rides, a couple of subway stops, or it was a crosstown bus with a transfer. I still remember to this day the transfer tickets. So we were on the MTA a lot. We traveled everywhere by bus or subway. The bus was sort of a second home to me. And I traveled with my mom a lot. I was the youngest of three, so I ended up traveling with my mom a lot. And I mostly loved it. She was wonderful, after all. She only lied about three things. She could have lied about a lot more things, but she picked those three things because I think she thought it made her more approachable. It made her, it gave her the ability to break through. In the 70s in New York City, those were dangerous times. We were dealing with Vietnam, the aftermath of Vietnam. There was anger palpable in the streets. There were lines drawn everywhere across racial divides, neighborhood divides, rich versus poor. The inner city was still mostly segregated, and there were neighborhoods that you didn't dare enter, neighborhoods that you never escaped. There was turf back then. We still had what's called turf. It's largely gone in New York City now, but your home turf was sort of where you belonged. And if you dare venture out of your home turf into other people's turf, there was almost always danger to be found. But my mom had a way of breaking through. She, with her absurd generosity, her impulse to give, would do this odd thing anywhere we went. And it was crushingly embarrassing to me. I cringed every time she did this. But no matter who we sat next to, she would reach into her purse, pull from the bottom, the depths of her purse, some food. Now, I don't know if you think this is odd, but 5-year-old, 6-year-old, 8-year-old Rocco thought this was extremely odd and was very ashamed of it. She would pull food out, and it was usually a piece of cheese. I'm not joking. A piece of salami, a piece of a sandwich that was, wrapped in a tea towel and made with homemade bread that looked nothing like American food. And she would pull out these alien objects and just give it to the youngest person near her within reaching distance. She would just say, "Hi, honey. Hi, honey. You want some of cheese? You want some of salami? You want some of sandwich?" And I would just cave into myself for fear of being judged, for fear of her experiment failing. Again, these were dangerous times. You didn't know if you could trust the person next to you. She made friends with everyone. It didn't matter who they were, what turf they came from. She used food and her absurd generosity as a tool to break through all the barriers that we were facing and make friends with everybody, with anybody. And she did that every day for the rest of her life. Now, if you've seen movies about New York in the 70s, you know what it looked like, right? There were graffiti-covered subway cars. There were abandoned cars in the street with all their tires missing, propped up on cinder blocks. There were gangs. There were people wearing, quote, colors. That's how it really was. That's the New York City I grew up in. So imagine this immigrant woman who was 21 plus going around just giving food to everybody. I never knew what was going to happen. I always expected the worst, but she always expected the best. At around 10 years old, I was allowed to take mass transit on my own. This is, for some reason, the age where you're bar mitzvahed in New York and you become a man and you're able to take the subway on your own at 10 years old. Go figure. So at 10 years old, my mom and I sort of went our separate ways. I didn't have to watch her do this cringeworthy act of absurd generosity every single day of my life anymore. I used to give her recommendations. I'd say, "Mom, pack some Twinkies. Ring dings are what people want. They don't want chunks of Parmigiano Reggiano from the bottom of your bag. Penny candy, a Jolly Rancher, anything. Packs of ketchup, soy sauce, duck sauce from a Chinese takeout would be better than your crumbled Parmigiano Reggiano." What I didn't realize was my mom was giving away the possession that she valued the most. Parmigiano Reggiano to this day is very expensive, and back then it was very expensive. And to give it away was like giving away, all the tea in China. It was the most generous gesture you could make. And she loved doing this, and it was always crumbles of Parmigiano Reggiano from the bottom of the bag. It was never a perfectly wrapped chunk of Parmigiano Reggiano that you could say was 2 or 3 ounces. It was literally whatever was left over. And in Italy, they don't care because Parmigiano Reggiano is dry-aged cheese, and here's some nerdy chef stuff. It's got antimicrobial properties, doesn't really ever go bad. The longer it ages, the better it tastes. It's used as collateral for loans in Italy to this day. It's so valuable. So my mom would continue to do this for her whole life. And I continued to take the subway and the buses on my own. And I went to school. I went to a very sort of strict uniform school, parochial school. And I made it to about 6th grade without much problems. And one day there's a new kid in class from another neighborhood. Let's call him Jimmy for the sake of privacy. As if he knew I was the most frightened kid in class, he zeroed in on me the first few moments of his presence in our school. He was clearly, when I look back, I now understand, having problems at home and troubled, and probably wasn't eating 3 meals a day, and his clothes were never quite clean. He's a kid who really needed friendship and compassion. And he probably was a little ashamed of that. So he compensated by being a bully and guess who he picked to be his first victim? That's right, me. I was his first victim, and I remained his victim for a long time. This rivalry, well, it's not even fair to call it a rivalry because I never fought back because I accepted that he was going to bully me and I was going to be the victim, and I didn't really know what to do about it. And I was so ashamed about it, I didn't tell anyone about it. Only the kids in school knew about it. I didn't even tell the teachers. He was very clever about it, so he kept it hidden. And for a really long time, this went on. And it was crushing my psyche. I was unable to perform at the levels I used to perform. I was one of the most prodigious readers in my class. I loved reading out loud. I was always the person the teacher called on to read out loud. And then I stopped doing that. They started taking me out of class once a week to talk to someone, which I now know is therapy. It's a form of children's therapy. So things were changing for me. This boy was really impacting how I saw myself, how I valued myself, and how I lived my life. This was becoming serious. And to this day, I remember all these moments vividly. And I understand now there was a lesson to be learned. I didn't understand then. Anyway, this battle with Jimmy raged on and on and on. And it got to a point where one day he followed me home. He laid siege onto my home with a friend of his from, I think, his neighborhood, and just was sort of, waiting me out to see what I would do. Was trying to break in, the backyard and breaking windows, and was doing everything he could to try to get me to react and come out and fight. I was terrified. I was terrified. I think this was sixth grade. I might have been 11 or 12 or maybe 11 years old. And the bully who'd been plaguing me for years was now at my home. He knew where I lived. He followed me home. And this went on for hours. The neighbors were watching, but of course they did nothing because they were also terrified. This went on for hours and hours. And at this time, my mom was working as a school lunch lady at PS 82, I think it was, in another part of Queens. So she had to take the bus to get to work every day. And Jimmy came from another neighborhood, so he had to take public transportation to come to school every day. He lived far away, unlike most of us who live within walking distance of the school. Anyway, I waited and waited and hoped for miracles and tried to avoid him. And, I thought about coming out and confronting him, and I thought better of it. And I just thought, wait till my mom gets home. She'll fix this. She'll take care of this. She was going to be the first one home. And I waited and waited and waited. And things were really tense. There had been broken windows. There had been things thrown around, lots of yelling, lots of screaming. The whole neighborhood was tensed up. It was one of those moments where people start to call the police. And I see my mom walking down 148th Street where we lived in Jamaica. I thought I saw her first. And I knew that when she came, she was going to put an end to this. She was going to smack the boy in the face or something like that. That's what they would say back then. She was going to, talk to this boy, make him go away. Those were the kinds of things she did. She was really good at diffusing and making people who were, ready to fight and pounce, give up their fight and go home and be okay with it. She was that charming and that absurdly generous and always had something to give, whether it was her wisdom or a piece of cheese from her purse. So as she got closer, I tried to make eye contact with her, and I fixed on her and just prayed for her to come home as fast as possible. And as I'm thinking, I'm going to call her name out and ask her to help me, I hear the boy, Jimmy, say, "Mama?" with surprise in his voice. And then I said, "Mama," with relief in my voice. And at this moment, I realized there was a connection here I didn't know about. And that she had been using this absurd generosity scheme of hers to make friends with my bully. But we didn't know about each other. So I remained his bully until that day where he realized that the mama he met on the bus every day, who gave him cheese and salami and bread, was my mama. Imagine that. He was immediately diffused, looked to me and said, "It's cool." Gave her a hug and walked home. And every day after that, we were friends. We were cool. I made it to 8th grade where we graduated, and we still talk to each other to this day. Turns out he did have a lot of problems that he had to deal with every single day just to get to school. And the acts of kindness that my mom showed him on his way to school were enough to diffuse the entire situation. So the absurd generosity that my mom showed every day of her life, that I made fun of, that I was embarrassed about, ended up saving me from at least a couple of bruises or something even worse. So if you're considering absurd generosity tonight, I just want to let you know from firsthand knowledge, it works. And you never know who you're touching. You never know whose life you're going to change. You never know when that absurd act of generosity is going to be exactly what that person needs to lift them out of whatever darkness they're in into the light and change their lives forever.
Rocco, oh my goodness. Thank you so much for that
Thank
story.
you, Megan.
Oh my
Thank you.
God. Right. Rocco, did you feel it? You got incredibly vulnerable with us this evening.
Yes, it's you know me, I love a good cry. I held it back tonight. I'm Italian. We cry about food, so you know. But I thought it was important to share the most vulnerable part of that story and let people know that, you know, eccentric mamas and their Parmigiano Reggiano can be a lifesaver.
Oh my God. No, generous women who see people who need help can be lifesavers. And that's your mom. Rocco, thank you so much for your story. Thank you for giving your heart to us tonight. Thank you for introducing us to Nicolina. Although I know you talk about her a lot, but if you're meeting Rocco tonight for the first time, you might be meeting his mom for the first time. Thank you so much for your story tonight.
My pleasure.
Man, that's why we love live storytelling. I've been coaching live stories since 2011, and it is always a gift from one person's heart, we hope, to your heart. I would like to take just a second to thank our colleagues at the Nashville Tennessean for first working with Maneet Chauhan, who will come up in just a moment. She told her story there several years ago, and we are lucky to have her telling a new story tonight. I'd also like to acknowledge our colleagues at the Arizona Republic in Phoenix. As I mentioned earlier, Erin Mare has been a fan and a supporter of the project for years. We're incredibly grateful for the generosity of his heart and his stories. So hello to those two newsrooms. We're in 22 cities across America, and as soon as it's safe to sit in the dark with a bunch of strangers, we'll be back in those towns. Until then, we do hope you will continue to support our journalists as part of the USA Today network. And again, tonight, joining us virtually and supporting Feeding America. Right now, we're going to make Feeding America, we're going to bring Feeding America a little bit closer to you. It is my blessing to introduce you to Rosemary Pellet. She's from Waverly, New York. Hi, Rosemary. Thank you for being with us tonight.
Hi, Megan. Thank you for having me.
Rosemary is here tonight to talk with us about how she once visited, or she once took part of Feeding America as a client, and now she's a volunteer with them. But before she was a client, Rosemary was a nurse for more than 20 years, serving her community, and then things changed. Rosemary, bring us up to date. Like, what was the turning point there? After you'd been a nurse, you got some difficult news.
Yes, Megan. I was a nurse for 24 years. The last few years, I was having neck and back issues, just from regular wear and tear, degenerative disc disease, etc. And in 2013, my primary doctor said, "You're off work, no more. I'm not signing any more medical release forms for you to go back to work. This is it." And I think for a couple of days I was kind of in shock, and I even made another appointment with her because it was like, what are you talking about? Are we talking a couple weeks? She said, "No, I think you need to apply for Social Security disability." It again, another big shock. nursing was all I ever wanted to do. That was my career. I loved helping people. And shortly thereafter, I became food insecure. And
oh, sorry, but you'd been without work. It took a while to get on Social Security, right? And you were in between jobs.
2.5 years it took to get on the Social Security. And during that time, I was on public assistance for the first time in my life. I did get help for food somewhat. Still towards the end of the month, well, for a couple months before I was able to get public assistance, had gotten really bad. I couldn't pay my rent. I had no income. A voucher was sent to my landlord for half of my rent. My rent was paid by my son and my nephew, the balance of it. Thank God for them. And it just continued to get worse. The food insecurity was the worst. It's the worst.
Well, tell us a little bit about that. Not everyone knows what that word means.
I have a couple examples, and this has happened to me. You get up in the morning and, you're hungry, you want to get your breakfast. And, I went out to the cupboard and I had some cereal. And I'm like, oh, great. But I had to eat the cereal dry because I couldn't afford milk. And, lunch and dinner sometimes was a jar of peanut butter, eating it with a spoon because I couldn't afford to buy the bread. It was a very difficult time, and it's not something you want to go through. I feel I was a little bit on the luckier side because my children were already grown. And I can't imagine, well, I can now, but I couldn't back then, what some of these families go through that have children.
But you were able to get help. I know that was hard for you, but tell us a little bit about what it was like to first go into the food.
It took me, I probably needed to go in about a month before I did. When I went in, I met Sister Mary, and she was very wonderful, wonderful lady. And all the volunteers, for the most part, were wonderful people there. They made me feel comfortable. But at first, it was extremely embarrassing. I felt kind of downgraded, I guess. I've got plenty of food, like 4 paper bags, not little plastic bags. They filled up those paper bags there. And I remember thinking on my way home, and I'll never forget this feeling that, wow, I can go home and I can actually make meat and potatoes and a vegetable. And I won't even tell you how long it's been since I had meat in my freezer because I couldn't afford it.
Oh my gosh. You're really like painting a picture of like how magical that moment was, like a kid on Christmas morning.
Yes.
But now, right, I know. But now you said that you've really dedicated yourself to returning the favor. Talk to us about how you're helping out Feeding America in your own community.
It started actually from that food pantry. I met some women from the Food Bank of the Southern Tier, who they're also members of Feeding America, and I became a Speakers Bureau member, and we went out in the community. I volunteered at a food pantry for a couple years. I babysat for about 10 months, so I had to back off from doing the volunteering. And I was getting back into it, and then the COVID-19 started. And at this point, the only help I can really be is they call me if they need me for the food distribution sites, which consist of them bringing the boxes of food in a truck, and the families coming to get them, just drive up with their car and we load it in. And plus I do deliveries. And just a little story recently, I just kind of get a chuckle out of it. It was kind of a fun day. Not that the people needed food wasn't fun, but I think you knew what I meant. I was asked a couple weeks ago if I could, if I knew of any families down in my area. I was about 15 minutes away from where they were having the distribution on May 1st. And I said, oh, sure, I'll put it on Facebook. I'll find some people. And I got 10 families. And I know that doesn't sound like much, but I only had less than a day. This happened at like 3:00 on a Wednesday, and I only had until noon on Thursday. So I got 10 families, and after the first 6, I thought, wait a minute, how I was picking up and delivering all this food, and I a sedan, and I can get a lot of food in there, trust me, but I wasn't going to get 6 families worth of food in there, and then it ended up 10. So I had a little extra money, and I used my money to go and rent a U-Haul. And it was just such an enjoyable day. The guys at the distribution site helped me load it up, and it was just so wonderful to see the families' faces when they come out to get the food. They were so happy and so appreciative. And the children, that's even better, because there was a few little bags of potato chips and, some snacks that they don't always have a chance to get. And they'd be running out and they want some. It was just a wonderful, wonderful day.
Oh my gosh, Rosemary, thank you so much for your volunteerism with Feeding America. Thank you for sharing your time with us tonight. And thank you for being vulnerable and sharing your whole journey with us so that we have a better understanding of why our donations matter so much right now.
Thank you for having me, Megan.
We appreciate you, Rosemary. Thank you. It is my joy to welcome up Maneet Chauhan, because if you're a fan of the Food Network like I am, you know Maneet. Thanks so much for being here. Maneet's going to tell us a story about being a little kid in India and her first experiences with the way food can change our lives. Take it away.
Thanks, Megan. But after listening to Erin, Claudette, Rocco, and Rosemary, I don't want to talk. I just want to continue hearing their stories. My story is a love affair. It was a love affair. It still is a love affair. It's my love affair with food, which started when I was a kid. There's a standing joke in the family that I was born with a ladle in my hand. And, my life has been a collection of impactful stories, which has been pretty much everybody's life. But mine almost always revolves around food. And that has resulted in me being where I am today. I grew up in this really small town in eastern India. It was called Ranchi. And the neighborhood that I grew up in had people from all over India. Now, to put that in perspective, India has around 29 states. Each and every state has a very distinct cuisine and a very distinct culture of its own. So I was surrounded with people from all over India cooking different food than what was being cooked in my house. And I was definitely that kid. I would go to my neighbors' houses and knock on their door. And when they would open, there would be this small kid with woeful eyes looking at them and telling them that my parents hadn't fed me. Mind you, this was after I had had dinner or lunch at home. And my really proper parents till date blame each other. They're like, this is from your side of the family. No, this is from your side of the family. But what could my neighbors do other than invite me into their houses, to their dining tables? But what I was more interested in was the kitchen. And I would go into the kitchen, and the ladies of the houses who were cooking, who I would call aunties, I would be that why kid asking, why are you heating the oil? Why are you using these spices? I mean, they were ingredients, they were techniques which I hadn't seen in my Punjabi household, which was being used in their houses. And that was the time I realized that I might not be able to speak the language that they were speaking in their homes or understand the culture. But what I did understand was the deliciousness of the food. And boy, was it delicious. That was the first moment when I realized that food is the greatest connector of all time. I could connect with anybody just on the basis of food. Um, as I got older, our family used to be invited for dinner events to our family friends' houses, and inevitably the phone call which would come would be that to my parents would be, "You guys come around at 7ish, and with Maneet, send her at 3 o'clock so that she can help us cook." And boy, I enjoyed those times so much because I was getting a one-on-one cooking lesson with these amazing aunties. I was learning how to make regional curries. I was learning how to make desserts, different spice blends. I mean, this was my playing ground. This was so absolutely incredible. Um, in our backyard, we had guava trees, we had curry leaf trees, and we had mango trees. Um, I was a complete tomboy growing up, and I was never allowed to climb those trees. Yeah, you can imagine. I definitely followed those rules. But the one time that I was allowed to climb those mango trees was when my grandmom would come to visit. The mangoes would be these raw mangoes, and she would be like, okay, Maneet, just climb up the trees. And what could my mom say? This was her mother-in-law, and she was overriding my mom's instructions on not to climb the trees. But of course, I would climb the trees and I would pluck these raw mangoes, and we would make mango pickle out of it, Indian mango pickles. And it was such an amazing experience. If I close my eyes right now, I can actually smell the fennel, the mustard, the onion seed that my grandmom would use for the pickle. I can hear the pounding of the mortar and the pestle, of my grandmom grinding fresh spices for the pickle. I can see pieces of raw mango on a crisp white cotton sheet being sun dried outside. Of course, my sister and I, we were designated as the live scarecrows to make sure that none of the crows came and took any of the mangoes. But those were the memories. I can still taste that pickle. I can't recreate it, but those were the best memories. Um, I connected with my grandmom on that. So the connection with food just continued. My older sister, Riti, when she went for her undergrad, I was the best younger sister. All I wanted to do was hang out with her cool friends. And I found her in because every time I would go to visit her, I would take food, be it cakes, be it cookies. And soon I realized that I was the most popular kid on campus. And I'm like, this is all through food. So that was another time that I realized that I could connect with people on food. These food connections have continued through life. In fact, my husband and business partner, Vivek Diora, and I, we did our undergrad in India. Until date, we talk about food memories of the street foods that we would eat after our classes. Um, we travel the world right now in search of good food, be it Mexico, be it Brazil, China, India, Paris, France, Italy. In fact, in Peru, we went to a place called Urumbamba, and I just strolled off to a mercado, a local market. And Vivek came across me, he stumbled across me maybe half an hour later, and I was making potato croquettes with a local potato seller. And the most incredible part was that I couldn't speak Spanish and she couldn't speak English, but both of us were content and we still connected because the connection was over food. And that to me, I think is so incredible. Um, Today, we cook as a family. Vivek and I have two kids, a 8-year-old and a 5-year-old, and usually it's chaotic. They are dirty dishes, there is screaming, everybody has an opinion about how to make a dish. But these are the most valuable moments because we are connecting as a family, we are cooking together. In fact, we use these cooking sessions as life lessons for our kids, especially with our 8-year-old daughter. I set up everything when I'm cooking, and I explain to her that this is called mise, which means prep. And this is very important for a chef because you need to have everything in place to make sure that you get a successful dish. And that's what you need to do with your schoolwork. Make sure that you have everything with you so that your final essay is absolutely spectacular. So to me, food as a connector is infinite. I think it connects people. It garners respect for each other's flavors and techniques, and it simply makes for a belly full of happiness, and it just nourishes your soul. Um, the aspect of food being a connector is especially relevant in today's COVID world. We see that the world has come to a standstill. A lot of people are staying at home. And what are we seeing? We are seeing a surge of cooking. We are seeing a surge of baking. I mean, oh my God, how many breads are being baked from scratch in this country? It is so incredible. We see people trying their family recipes or recipes which have been handed down generations so that they can connect with their loved ones. We are seeing people experimenting recipes from all over the world. In the absence of being able to travel to those countries, at least they have the connection with the countries and the people through food. So we see that connectivity through food is so critical. Um, the most amazing part is that as these dishes are being created, they are being virtually shared, and people are still connecting despite the social distancing. So, to me, food is the greatest connector. It will always be the greatest connector. And it not only nourishes our belly and our soul, but our community as well.
Maneet, thank you so much for your story. Oh my gosh. I love the idea of you taking something really beautiful, like teaching your kids to cook, and then reminding them that this is a lesson for school. Oh my gosh. Thank you so much for this story and these memories of childhood, especially being, I could just picture like the little you going to your sister's college classes and like bringing all the sweets. I would have hung out with you, right?
Well, you can now.
God bless. Thank you. Thank you so much for your story and all of your memories. We are so thankful to you for joining us. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for being on our show tonight. We're going to hear from Chef Edward Lee, and he has now, we just need to give him just a second. We are so excited to have him. He is joining us from Louisville. He's going to tell us a story about a trip to France that changed his life.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for having me. This is an awesome night and so fun listening to everyone else's story. So my story is from my youth. And as a chef, I think everyone wants to. So there's a thing when you're a chef, like you do a stagiaire. And stagiaire means that you go and work for a famous chef at a famous restaurant and you make no money and you get treated like dirt. And it's the best thing ever. So, you know, back when I was a young kid, like the goal was always to go to France. And you know, before you go, you romanticize it in your head and you're going to meet this famous chef and you're going to become best friends and it's going to be this whirlwind thing. So in my early 20s, I believe I was like 21 and it was probably, you know, late 1990s. I booked my trip and I was supposed to be 6 months in France. And I was very excited about it. So I took a plane to London and I took the train from London to Paris. And in that time, my one piece of luggage got stolen. So I arrived in Paris and I literally have like 2 pieces of clothing or 2 clothing options. And I had 6 months to go. And so I said, yeah, I can do it. I can do it on 2 pairs of pants. So I'm walking around and it ended up being kind of like the worst experience of my life. I worked for a bunch of very mean chefs who didn't really have time for me. I didn't speak any French. I tried to learn. People were not kind to me. And it was actually a very tough time. I was young and I was very idealistic and I wanted to have this beautiful experience and work for a 3-star Michelin chef. and didn't really go my way. And I remember traveling through, so I did jobs in Paris. I worked in Lyon and Marseille, and I did that for about 3 months. And as time went on, I just became more and more disheveled, and my clothes became less and less good looking. And so I finally end up in Annecy. And I wanted to work for a chef named Marc Bayrat, who back then was 3-star Michelin, and a complete badass, was a shepherd, and was doing this really intricate, complex food. And I really wanted to be like his protege. And so I went there and I interviewed, and I had it all set up. And to make a long story short, without there were language barriers and paperwork problems, and by that time I looked pretty homeless, and for many other reasons I didn't get the stage. So I was now distraught. I had 3 months left to go. I was out of money. I was out of options, and I kind of just didn't know what I was going to do. So I was in Annecy, which is Haute-Savoie. It's kind of like an alpine town, and it's on the Swiss border, and it's a beautiful little quaint town, and there's a beautiful lake and forest. So I start walking around and just not knowing what I'm going to do for the next 3 months. And I saw this young chef who was on his patio smoking a cigar, and we just struck up a conversation. And I told him my story, and he said, "Oh, that jerk. Well, I worked for him for 7 years. Like, you should come work for me and I'll teach you everything he knows." And I go, "Oh, great." So I ended up working, and it was a restaurant called the Belvedere in Lake Annecy. And, he was not a celebrity chef, and he was not famous, and his cuisine was very regional, very humble, but absolutely delicious. A lot of force meats, some pasta, a lot of regional cuisines. And I just ended up staying there, and he would take me out on walks in the morning, because he did that every morning. And half the reason he kept me around was because he wanted to practice his English. And so we would speak English, and I wanted to practice French, but he wouldn't let me speak French because he said my French was horrible. So we would practice his terrible English while we went for walks. And I remember one morning I went out by myself and I foraged all these mushrooms, and it took me like 2 hours, and I brought them back to him in this beautiful little basket, and I was so proud, like a young child. And he looked at me and smiled and said, "Ah, yes, this is garbage," and he threw it in the compost pile. So that was like most of my days in France were kind of like that. And then one day we went out for a walk, and at this point it's probably summer. And we come upon a strawberry patch, and he says, "We have to pick these strawberries for tonight's service." And I said, "Okay." And these strawberries did not look like anything. They were kind of pale. They were tiny little things, and they were kind of all gnarly, and they looked like nothing that I had experienced, right, as a chef. And I grew up in New York, and I thought I knew everything. And I grew up, eating these big, fat, red strawberries. And I thought I knew what a strawberry tasted like. And we're in the woods, and I picked one of these strawberries, and I put it in my mouth, and it just transformed everything that I thought I knew about a strawberry. And in that moment, I realized that as a 20-something-year-old person, I had never eaten a strawberry in my entire life before. What I had eaten was something that was commercially grown and something that was manufactured, but I'd never eaten a wild strawberry before. And as a chef, when that hits you, it's like the pinnacle of what a strawberry should taste like. It is like the archetype. It is like the absolute truth of a strawberry. And I remember just sitting there, and I was stunned that I thought I knew what a strawberry was, and here I was, learning for the first time that this is what flavor is. This is what, agriculture is. This is what happens when nature meets a chef. And it was just, I literally was panicked and paralyzed. And in my head, like, spun. I'm like, well, what if the same thing happens with zucchini? and eggplant and peaches? Like, what if I don't know anything? That everything I've learned up until this point was a lie. And it made me think about what it was to farm, what it was to forage, what it is to like have a relationship with nature as a chef. And I remember trying to express those words to the chef, and he just looked very confused, because for him, he had grown up with this his whole life. It wasn't special. It was, this is how he ate. This was natural to him. And I remember picking another strawberry, and I tried to put that in my mouth because it was so amazing. I wanted to taste another one, and he slapped it out of my hand and said, "This is for the guests, not you, you little donkey." I think is what his exact words were. And so we ended up picking out. I will say, if he's watching, I did sneak another strawberry or two in my mouth when he wasn't watching, and we went back and we cooked and we made a strawberry tart out of it. And the whole time, I just, and I still think about that strawberry today. It really changed the way I thought of myself as a chef, and I thought of the world and what my relationship to food was going to be for the rest of my life. And I think about it in terms of also struggle and hardship. And what you want in life is sometimes not what you're ever going to get. And there are things that are beyond your control. But you have to keep your mind open. I spent 6 months in France having pretty much a miserable and forgettable time. But that one morning hike, eating that one strawberry, made it all worth it. And I would do it all over again just for that one experience. And you know, here I was thinking I wanted to work for a famous chef and learn technique and do all this fancy stuff. And I ended up spending 2.5 months with a humble chef who had a little, you know, bistro, who taught me a lesson that I carry with me today. And I tell that story to my cooks now all the time. And I feel like a life in the kitchen is also that. In a day and age where there's a lot of television and media and there's a lot of hoopla about being a chef, a lot of what being a chef is for me is just a string of endless days that are hard. And there's that one day when that dish comes out perfect. There's that one day when you get a peach so amazing that you don't even want to cook it. You just want to serve it on a plate raw. And those are the things that carry me through this career and this life. And I always think about the things that you can control in life and what you can't control in life. And that the 6 months that I spent in France, I tried so hard to control my internship and my stage, and I tried to do it, and nothing worked. And the minute I let go of that control and let myself be mentored by this humble French chef, I learned a lesson that has carried me through my whole career. So part of that is I try and teach my chefs, now that I'm the elder statesman, to just open your mind, be free to understand what is going to happen, and to understand that there are certain things in life you can control, and then there's others that you can't. And right now I know that everyone is struggling. As am I, and every chef and every restaurateur out there right now is going through a really, really hard time. But maybe there will be a silver lining that comes out of this too. So look for that wild strawberry in your days of struggle.
Oh my gosh, Chef Lee, thank you so much for that story.
You're welcome.
I also, yeah, sincerely though, I think so many of us have had that moment where we tasted a dish and our eyes were opened, or we shared a dish with a person and our heart was opened. And so I really appreciate you like taking us back to that memory. I also just love the idea of like little you eating a strawberry and being like, have I ever eaten food before
Ever, yeah. It's I literally can taste it right now, and as I'm thinking about it.
Well, I really appreciate that memory and you sharing it with us. I know I've had it too. Chef Lee, thank you for your story. Everyone, I'm going to bring up all of our chefs right now tonight so you can say thank you to them. And I'm going to drop away so you can say thank you to Rosemary as well.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Bye.
It was wonderful.
Thank you so much.
We are so appreciative of you for watching tonight. We are so appreciative to our chefs for sharing their hearts so very much and their stories. Rosemary, thank you for helping us understand the importance of donating to Feeding America and the difference it can make in a person's life. To all of our viewers, we appreciate your time and your open-heartedness. To Humana, we appreciate your generosity in creating this opportunity for us to be useful to each other and to Feeding America. Good night. Stay safe. We'll see you soon.